let's continue this series. And let's go through something kind of odd. So, I have discussed my love/hate relationship for the Chicago Blackhawks. And it does go through phases. And this was a phase where I really liked the Chicago Blackhawks. I really did. I mean, there were a couple of players I thought were kind of jerks, but in general, I really liked the Chicago Blackhawks, and there's some interesting storylines here. This was a team that won 11 games in a row. This was a year that I felt like both they and the Penguins just really wanted to get the playoffs over with. Let's just get it done. Because they ended losing 4 in a row. So they win 11 in a row, lose 4 in a row. There's only 18 games played. Just as an example of how odd that is, the Vegas Golden Knights, as I'm recording this, reached the Stanley Cup Final in 15 games, which is impressive. These guys did it in 14. And remember, that's 12 wins and 2 losses. It's pretty impressive. And the playoffs didn't start off with them looking like big contenders. They won the first game 3-1. They lose the second game 5-3. This is against, of course, the St. Louis Blues. They lose the third game in double overtime 5-4. And I was cheering for Chicago because Chicago had been, to that point, a kind of a bad team during the late 80s. It was kind of nice to see them doing well. Game 4, they win 5-3. Game 5, they win 6-4. And they win Game 6 2-1 to end things with St. Louis and get that winning streak going. They go against Detroit. They win 2-1, 3-1, 5-4, 1-0. Who's Steve Yzerman? Nobody. This is at the point where Yzerman is still seen as a player who can't win a Stanley Cup. That was the thing. Yeah, no, that was a legit thing. Edmonton. This was the series that really warmed my heart. I had watched Edmonton destroy Boston, Minnesota in certain playoff series, Vancouver regularly, and it was nice to see Edmonton against Chicago. So game 1, I'm at a friend's house. My friend's a huge Oilers fan, and she was talking some trash before the game, and about how the Oilers had won 5 Stanley Cups in 8 years. At this point, the Oilers had won 5 Stanley Cups in 8 years, and they're going to win this. Chicago, who's Chicago? And I kept saying, I don't think so. I think this is going to be different. The game was 8-2, and by the end of the game, I was the only one still watching, and I kept yelling, guys, they scored again. Anyways, it was a fun night for me, personally, because I had the first Chicago Blackhawks jersey I ever owned. I was wearing that day. That one I don't have now because it has a giant hole in it. No, not the Hossa jersey. It's just a Chicago tradition. So they win that one 8-2, and that just did it. They win the second game 4-2. They win the third game in overtime 4-3, and then they knocked the Oilers out convincingly with a 5-1 win in game 4. And I was a happy camper because Chicago was coming up against Pittsburgh. You know, that team that's really upset me the year before with their knocking out both Boston and Minnesota. And fresh off knocking Boston out again, they're in the final again. And so I'm full on behind Chicago. I'm like, yeah, let's get this done. Come on, go Hawks, go. No. They lose game 1 5-4. That was a heartbreaker. That was a really close game. They lose game 2 3-1. They lose game 3 1-0. And then they lost game 4 6-5. They lost that game on June 1st. Now, right now we're at May 21st. There's no way the Stanley Cup Final ends by June 1st. This was just sort of, we got to get this done. And that's what they did. And this was with Mike Keenan as coach for Chicago. And this is when his nickname Captain Hook really started to take off. But his players, it was still a pretty hard-nosed team. Jeremy Roenick, 12 goals and 10 assists to lead the Chicago Blackhawks. I do not understand why Jeremy Roenick is not in the Hall of Fame. I am being completely honest here. I don't necessarily call myself a fan of Jeremy Roenick, but I don't understand why he's not in the Hall of Fame. It doesn't make any sense to me. Chris Chelios, 6 goals and 15 assists, and also not in the Hall of Fame for some bizarre reason is Steve Larmour with 8 goals and 7 assists. Brian Noonan, 6 goals and 9 assists. Dirk Graham, 7 goals and 5 assists. Steve Smith with a goal and 11 assists. So Steve Smith moves from Edmonton to Chicago here. Stefan Matteau, 4 goals and 6 assists. Hudson, 3 goals and 5 assists. Brent Sutter, who you may remember from the Islanders, 3 goals and 5 assists. Igor Kravchuk, 2 goals and 6 assists. Keith Brown of Newfoundland. And every time that Keith Brown was on the ice, they would remind you he was from Newfoundland because there weren't very many players from Newfoundland at that point. And Bob Cole really liked Newfoundlander hockey players. Michel Goulet had 3 goals and 4 assists. He's a Hall of Famer. He only played 9 games in those playoffs. Eddie Belfour, 12 wins, 4 losses. He's in the Hall of Fame. 2.47 goals against, 902 save percentage, which did take a beating in that finals. Hasek, 2 losses, 3.05 goals against, 886 save percentage. Dominik Hasek became a known guy in these playoffs. Not for tremendous save percentages and not for making all these amazing saves, but for being crazy. We found out in these playoffs that he was very unorthodox. He would charge out to the blue line to check the puck off of a guy's stick if he had to. And he was fearless. And he didn't get a lot of opportunities. He got a few because Mike Keenan, Captain Hook, was more than willing to play loose with his goaltenders. And it would kind of not work out for him. Later on, when Keenan's in St. Louis, for instance, he played Grant Fuhr basically every game he could and played him into the ground. Fuhr did the best he could with that kind of workload, but by the time the playoffs rolled around, he was done. But he would switch goalies regularly, and it was an issue. Now, Keenan moved around a lot. You've seen him in Philly. Now you're seeing him in Chicago. He went to New York. He was in St. Louis. He was in Vancouver, Calgary, Boston. He was in even Florida too. Anyways, he's been everywhere. And this is why when people say, "Do you think Keenan can go back and coach in the NHL?" Sure, that's why they keep adding franchises. Keenan hasn't been there. Send him there. So there you go. These Chicago Blackhawks, I liked these Chicago Blackhawks. I really wanted them to win the Cup, which is why they got swept in the Stanley Cup final. That's sort of the way these things work. Again, that's the theme when I talk about the finalists. I tend to like the finalists who lose more than I like the finalists who win. That's just my curse. Hopefully, it's just mine. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And this has been the finalists, the 1992 Chicago Blackhawks.